I am building a PC entirely out of thrift stores. I started going to thrift stores to buy cheap furniture, wobbly shoe racks, random lamps, that sort of thing. But every time I went, they had these bins, and you could rummage through them and buy whatever you wanted out of them for a flat price. And sometimes they had computer parts in those bins. And I had this crazy idea, one of those ideas that you just pass off as a joke when you first have it, that I might actually be able to build an entire computer out of stores like this. That joke turned into the best experience I've ever had building computers. We're going to start off with the motherboard. The motherboard is responsible for taking a whole bunch of different kinds of computer parts and putting them together in one space that lets the whole computer work together effectively. The tricky part about motherboards is they all come with a preset list of part types that you can run with that specific motherboard. For example, this one requires an AMD socket AM5 CPU. If I try to run any other CPU, this motherboard is not going to work. And you can see that there's quite an extensive list of different kinds of things that you need to get for this specific motherboard to actually function properly. Normally, if you're building a new computer, it's not really a problem because you could just go look up all of the different parts that have those specifications and then order those. But when you're in a thrift store environment, you don't have so many options. Availability becomes the driving factor of why you purchase anything, because it's difficult to find a complete set that you can work with one particular motherboard. I ended up having to circumnavigate that problem by buying a whole bunch of different motherboards, because I started with this one for like 6 months, and I was never able to find all the parts that fit just this board. So I actually have quite a few different kinds of motherboards, and the only one that ended up working out was this AMD motherboard right here. The CPU was without a doubt the hardest thing for me to find for this entire project. It was the last part that I picked up that made this entire build possible today. And that was a massive mistake. I should have started with the CPU right up front and then built everything else around it. The strength of the CPU would have let me know what kind of build I was going for, a mid-tier, a high-tier, so on. And it would have also let me choose a motherboard right up front that I could try to build everything else with. The way I did it, I forced myself into a corner of having to find one very specific CPU, which made it take forever for me to get a functional build. So if you want to save a whole lot of time and just get something that runs out of a thrift store, you need to start with the CPU, then get a motherboard, and buy everything else from there. This CPU had some leftover thermal paste on it from its previous user. It's actually one of the only used parts that I'm going to be using in today's build, which is very interesting to me, because when I first started shopping at thrift stores, I thought for sure that I was just going to find a whole bunch of old used parts from people's disassembled rigs, but that is evidently not the case. What's happening here is the stores I was shopping at are going to warehouses, and these warehouses have basically a reject pile, things that were returned improperly, things that were mislabeled, that they just don't want to take the time to restock on the shelves. The stores I was shopping at show up, buy whole truckloads of the stuff in bulk, and then put it in their stores to resell it. I profit basically brand new computer parts for a discount because of that. Now that the CPU is clean, we get to install it on the motherboard. You'll notice there's this little triangle in the top left corner right here. That matches up with this triangle on the CPU. You want to line those up when you drop the CPU in there. Next up, we got the N.2 NVMe SSD. This is basically a device that your computer uses to store all the files that you use on your computer, and this type of drive is very fast, making it good for playing video games. The manual actually tells you which slot to put this in, and it's normally labeled M.2_1, which is your primary drive. You want to make sure you install that one first. Finding any kind of computer part in thrift stores can be difficult depending on how specific your requirements are, but PC storage devices are a unique challenge. There are many standardized form factors, data interfaces, speeds, and storage sizes that classify what your storage is. Here's a big table of them that you can pause and look at if you're interested. A lot of people, myself included, would tell you that in today's world, setting up your main drive on anything besides an M.2 NVMe SSD is complete heresy. This is because any other combination limits the speed of your computer's loading times, which basically means your entire computer is going to run slower overall. In this context, it's tempting to back yourself into a corner and only buy that kind of SSD. But unlike the CPU situation, I would happily remain in this corner. The benefits of this kind of drive are so high that I consider the challenge of finding one well worth it. SATA-driven drives typically do have a bigger storage capacity though, and they are cheaper. So for performance computers, they are not dead. They just got new jobs as bulk storage instead of main performance drives. The good news is storage is standardized, which means almost any brand will do so long as that specific type of storage fits your needs. This does make it easier to find storage, but it comes at the flip side if it's selling out of thrift stores a lot faster, since so many different kinds of people can run the same kinds of storage. The net result is it's pretty difficult to find any kind of storage, but insanely difficult to find one specific kind of storage. RAM is the short-term memory of your computer. Think about it like desk space. Having a bigger desk doesn't make you work any faster, but it gives you more space to have things out in the open, which prevents you from having to slow down to find something in the pile. It was especially rare for me to find any form of RAM in a thrift store, and on the occasion that I did, it was usually a very dusty DDR3 stick of RAM, or some slightly modern version of DDR4 RAM. On a similar note, there is DIMM RAM and SO-DIMM RAM. DIMM RAM is the full-length sticks that we use in full-tower computers, like what we're building today. SO-DIMM is a compact version that is designed for laptops. Those two are not interchangeable. My setup needs the DIMM-style DDR5 RAM, which is near impossible to find in thrift stores, but I got extremely lucky. Now at this point in the video, I know a lot of people out there are going to say this is fake, because there's no way I walked in and got 4 identical sticks of RAM in one thrift store, right? I was just as amazed as you are, okay? I was actually just checking out to buy some other stuff, and I saw these 4 identical sticks in the back. They hadn't even put them out on the shelves yet. And I went, "Are those RAM over there?" And they kind of looked at me and said, "Yeah, what about it?" I'm like, "Can I look at them?" So I look at it, and I'm sitting here staring at the box, and I'm like, "How much do you want for this?" And they went, $152 for all 4 sticks total. That is shut up and take my money levels of good deal. Even if it was like a regular day, and RAM wasn't skyrocketing through the roof of pricing right now, I would have still bought it. So I'm thrilled. We're going to use all 4 sticks, and we're going to put it in there. It's case time. This is an NZXT H9 Elite case. I bought this thing because it was massive, meaning I wouldn't be limited by the physical size of my parts, and because it would have some very good airflow, as I didn't know how hot my parts were going to run either. Now you may notice it's completely lacking of all of its case fans. That is not a problem. In fact, it was actually a benefit. About case fans, don't worry too much about them. They're one of the most commonly found computer items inside of a thrift store in my experience, and they have all different shapes and sizes of them. For example, this one is a reverse fan, which you can use for intaking air into the case. It pulls air from this ugly bracketed side and puts it on the prettier fan side, so blowing through like this. Alternatively, you need exhaust fans as well, otherwise known as forward fans, that pull air in the pretty side and exhaust it out the ugly side, the exact opposite of before. The first set of fans I'm going to be using are these Galaxy fans by Jungle Leopard. They're actually not the best fans I have, with just hydraulic bearings, but they give me a lot of good fan pressure, and they're truly reverse fans, meaning they're intake fans. These are the only intake fans I was able to find in my thrift store hunt. Intake fans are a lot harder to find than exhaust fans. What's cool about them is they're building block fans, so you see how these two are stuck together, and I have a third one here. Well, you notice there's some tabs on the end of it here, and if I just slide those two down together and apply a little bit of pressure, I suddenly have connected tri-fans. And I intend to put these fans right here in this hole on the right side. Now, I also need some fans down here along the bottom section. And for those, I'm going to be using these Thermalright TLS12-S's. They're basically the same exact thing, except they have Stanley FDB magnetic assisted bearings. Very, very nice. Now, unfortunately, these are black fans, which is why they're going to go on the bottom, and I'm going to have to mount them upside down like this. The reason for this is these are actually exhaust fans, but being that I don't have any more intake fans, I'm just going to flip this thing upside down and install it backwards, which according to Google works just fine. We have a problem. Google said that the SFDB magnetic assist bearings would not rub the case if I installed them upside down. So I know I installed it correctly because if you blow on it like this, you see how that one there does its job just fine. But if I blow on this one, it immediately starts rubbing. That might go away when I turn it on, but I'm scared. I want to install these kind properly. So what we're going to do instead is replace them with some that are very similar but do not have any of the magnetic support, meaning they shouldn't sag at all and they should just sit right on the bearings and not rub the bottom of my mesh case. Okay, now that they're all screwed in there, if you give them a fling here, absolutely no rubbing. That's exactly what we want to see. For the rear fin, I'm going to go ahead and use one of these magnetic ones that I was scared to use on the bottom. Now I have most of the case fans installed inside my PC here, which takes care of the ambient cooling solutions, but I need to look at the CPU in particular. The CPU runs extremely hot in most computers, and it requires its own dedicated cooling device in order to keep it operational. There's lots of different ways to do this, and I need to explain what is readily available and what is hard to find in thrift stores. To give you a better understanding, this is the CPU we just installed. That CPU is going to get really hot, and we want to radiate the heat off of that into the case or directly out of the computer as best we can. One option for that is something like this ID Cooling IS55 Black. These are cheaper options, which essentially have you use a fan like this and a contact pad for your CPU. You essentially put some thermal paste on this pad right here and then mount it directly to the back of the CPU, something like this right here. This fan would then spin and would radiate heat off of that CPU into your ambient case. Your case fans then take that dispersed heat and remove it entirely from your system. There are several different kinds of this cooling option, but what you need to look at is the specs on them on the side, most notably the static pressure they can produce and the dimensions of them. The dimensions are required to make sure that it fits inside your motherboard, and the static pressure is good because more static pressure gets more air through these fins. The more air you force through these fins, the faster you can cool this CPU. So make sure you get one that has some decent specifications that also fits your CPU, which is usually clearly listed right on the box. The only other option I would typically run across is some form of all-in-one cooling. These are liquid cooling options, which have several advantages over their air cooling counterparts. It starts here, with this flat surface just like before that you mount to the back of your CPU. The heat from your CPU enters a liquid that is already pre-installed inside these hoses here. The liquid can absorb a lot more heat than air can, but it has another benefit of pumping that heat directly up to a radiator that you install on the side or top of your case. You then put some fans, like the case fans that we just installed a minute ago, on the bottom of this, which blow air across this radiator and emit the heat directly out of your PC, skipping the step where your case fans have to get rid of it. I was trying to get this motherboard to work for like the first 6 months, which is why I have this particular cooler, because it fits my CPU socket. But when I switched to this AM5 based motherboard, I ran into a problem of this no longer fitting. To solve that problem, I found a basically brand new NZXT Kraken 240, which is what we're going to be running with this motherboard today. I was going to have this nice section of me installing this radiator and the fans for the radiator to the bottom of this case plate right here. But the problem is that this radiator is actually too big. If I put it like this, you notice the fan won't fit. It won't fit inside this space. So I'm having to come up with a crafty idea to fix this here real quick. But I saw something in the instruction manual here. Right now I'm trying to mount it like this, where the radiator is going right against the top of the case with the fans below it. But that is not going to fit because this thing blocks my third fan. So instead I'm going to do the second option right here, which is to mount the radiator underneath of the fans and put the third fan over there by itself. So basically the idea here is that these are the radiator fans, and I essentially sit them in there like this. It gives space for my third fan to actually exist. Then I would just put this radiator on top, so when I flip it over, this will be on the bottom, these will be in between it, and this will be the top plate. This took me 40 minutes to get in there, and it's upside down. It took me almost an hour to get these screws into these things. NZXT really needs to up their game on how easy it is to line up their fans with their radiator. So I've got all the fans physically where they're supposed to be in the case, but I need to deal with all their cables in the background. I need to get this mess handled before I put in the power supply or the motherboard that introduces a lot of cable routing. Luckily, in my thrift store search, I managed to find a fan hub. The idea behind this thing is you put a whole bunch of PWM or ARGB connections in this one spot, and then just use these cables to connect it to one place in your motherboard. Ideally, it should make this thing look a lot better. So now I have all the case fans tied into one central location. If you're building a new computer, you get a power supply and all the cables that you need to run it come with it. In this case, I was able to find exactly that. Most of the time you don't find that in a thrift store, and you end up just getting this main block right here, and you had to find the cables separately. It might be tempting inside of a thrift store to try to mix and match random power supply cables with the power supply unit, due to availability reasons or to try to save money. But this involves serious risks, not just for your power supply, but for your entire computer, that you may never be able to repair. Although it is harder to find a power supply that comes with its cables, I would highly recommend you wait until you find one of those, to ensure that all of your power cables are designed for that unit. Based on my hardware inside this computer, I'm going to need an ATX 24-pin, 2 different 8-pin CPU cables, a single PCIe cable, a SATA cable, this crazy thing that came with the NZXT all-in-one cooler, and of course, big chunk power cable. But before I make a mess out of my case with all these cables, I need to know where they go, so it's finally time to install the motherboard. With the motherboard in place, it's time I installed my all-in-one cooler pump to the back of my CPU right here. The manual for this all-in-one cooler recommends I put it in this orientation, but that puts quite a bind on my cooler pump poses here, so what I'm going to do instead is turn this 90 degrees and plop it in like that. This cooler came pre-installed with thermal paste, so all I had to do was take off the Intel bracket and put on the AM5 bracket such that it fits my CPU. While I struggled a bit ago to install the radiator on this thing, the cooling pump went on very smoothly. Great job NZXT on that. For power supplies, I plug all of my cables into the back up front. That way I know I have a space for each cable that I need in the build. This also tells me the in-build length that I can work with for each cable. And at the end of the project, if I have any open, unused connections, I know that I might have missed something and I should check it. The last major part for this build is the graphics card, which brings me to this particular 1660 Super. I've had this thing since day one. This is one of the original parts that I found that inspired me to build the entirety of this computer. And the ironic part about it is despite the fact that it's basically brand new, still in its factory packaging even, I'm not going to be able to run it today. And the reason for that is this build's changed a lot since the start of it. This thing's going to max out at about 1080p, 60 FPS, maybe 1440p if I pushed it really hard. And I thought when I started this that was going to be the most I'd ever need. But this build now is capable of so much more than that. It's so much more powerful than anything I could have ever dreamed of building out of this, that the original part that I picked up for it isn't a good fit for it anymore. And as much as I hate to just shelf this thing for as long as it's sat around waiting to be running here, I have to, for this build to actually make any sense. So as of yesterday, I picked this up. This is a GeForce RTX 4060 Ventus. I chose this for two reasons. The first is the 4060 is obviously a far more capable GPU than a 1660 Super. But the second reason is they're both made by MSI, and they're both Ventus GPUs. There is a stark similarity between my original choice for a GPU and the one I'm going to actually install today. And I like that. I think this new GPU applies some heritage to what I was going to install. I managed to find this graphics card holder by Easy DIY Fab. You use these to prevent graphics card sag, which can damage the ports over time. I wouldn't necessarily need it for this 4060, but if I ever upgrade to a bigger GPU, it would be nice to have. These are hard to find inside of thrift stores, and most of the time they don't fit your case, so be careful when buying them. Now it's time for mice and keyboards. This is a bit of a rabbit hole with how many different kinds of mice and keyboards there are, but by far the most common are these cheap combo sets. They're functional and not really that great, but you can find them almost every single time you go into a thrift store. But there are also more specialized boards, such as this Kissant 75% layout. This is a typist keyboard that has gasket fit keys for a very smooth typing experience. You buy these keyboards if you need accurate typing all the time. And I was going to use this as my main keyboard. I actually really like this thing, especially with how versatile it is with wireless or wired. It came with its own keycap puller and even its own charger. But I ended up finding a full-size mechanical gaming keyboard. These keyboards are designed for insanely fast response times, which make them good for playing video games, but they often take up 2 USB ports on your computer. Interestingly, this one was boxed as a K100, but it's actually a K70 style board. I'll be using this as my main keyboard today, despite the fact that it's missing some keycaps. For computer mice, you can often find these cheap battery-operated ones that use a dongle to connect to your computer wirelessly. These are so common and so low quality that I would recommend you wait until you can find a better one, much like the keyboard situation. One step up from there is this beat-up thing. This is a Razer DeathAdder Hyperspeed version 3. These are slightly harder to find, but also not rare, and are often used as competitive video game mice. It can run wirelessly with a dongle, but features a rechargeable battery, unlike the first mouse, using a cable that is not shown here. So that's good for budget mice, but what about something nice? This mouse is slightly larger, has adjustable DPI, a quality scroll wheel, and some very nice buttons. But what's this on the bottom? That is an adjustable weight chamber that you can put this weight into to adjust the weight of the mouse to your liking. Overall, this is a much higher quality mouse, and is the main one that I will be running in today's build. If you have a nice mouse, you should make sure you also have a nice mouse pad to use it on. Thrift stores are an excellent source of these, especially for these small designs that you see here. They also have larger designs, such as this one, which I'll be using with my build today. These larger ones cover more of your desk and allow you to keep your mouse on the same plane as your keyboard. Without any further delay, it's time to boot the PC. This whole case seems to be working just fine, except for that fan. It's not turning, and it most definitely should be. So I plugged the fan into a completely different port down here on the motherboard, and it's still not turning even if I give it a little nudge. I'm assuming that fan is completely dead. So get this, I've been testing this fan using the BIOS settings just to make sure that this thing is supposed to be spinning, and if you leave it in the side angle like this, it does nothing. But if you lay it out flat like this and you give it a wee bump, what this tells me is that this is a magnetically assisted bearing and that the magnets aren't doing their job very well. So basically, this thing's floating in ways that it's not supposed to, which means it's rubbing the case. So hear me out here. I had this fan installed in the back of my case. It didn't work. So I had a backup fan that was identical to it that I thought would surely work if the first one didn't. This one didn't work either. So then I got a third fan right here from a completely different brand, and I was like, I'll just stick this one in there just to get it to work. But it's too big and it won't fit inside the hole. I finally found a fan that actually fit inside this hole, but it had some shorter cables on it that required me to loop the cables down through the GPU bracket and into a slot at the very bottom of the motherboard instead of my fan hub. It's not great, but at least it works. What you're looking at here is a numerical comparison between two different computers, the left side being my thrift store computer, while the right side is a known flagship computer capable of just about anything I need it to do. The CPUs are strikingly similar, whereas the GPU is noticeably lacking. So the question is, how far can I actually push this thrift store computer? The first test is Balatro. Balatro is a very lightweight card-playing video game that runs on almost anything. So it comes as no surprise to me that my thrift store computer can run this just as good as the flagship in true 4K 60 plus frames per second. The second test was SnowRunner. I fully expected this first 4K test to run terribly, but to my surprise it actually did pretty well, at least visually. What you're not seeing is the computer is dying trying to render this right here, and it's actually eating my inputs and causing a lot of input lag, which make the game difficult to play. So by dropping it down to about 2K resolution, the game ran like a dream. This is completely playable at 2K and an enjoyable experience to boot. I found this impressive for something that has soft terrain, some accurate lighting, and some decent physics in a three-dimensionally rendered world. If you don't mind not being able to play at full 4K, this is a completely valid option. The next step up was Wreckfest 2, starting off with ultra preset 4K graphics. That was a complete slideshow that nearly nuked my entire computer, so I very quickly bailed out of there and dropped it to high preset instead. To my surprise, this actually ran pretty smoothly, but it had a lot of input lag, similar to SnowRunner, so I just went back out to the settings and dropped it to medium preset. This led to a very pleasant surprise of the game running in 4K on that medium preset very smoothly. While the computer is working pretty hard for this, it is not out of the question at all for this computer to run this. So far, this computer has proven itself very capable, but I wanted to find the limit of this thing, so I decided to pick something that would kill it. Cyberpunk 2077. This game is known to have one of the highest workloads of any game ever made, specifically due to its amazing rendering engine that features both ray tracing and full path tracing. For those that don't play games, it essentially makes the lighting look very lifelike, at the cost of extraordinarily high processing power consumption. I started off in 4K with path tracing enabled, and by all means this should have nuked my computer. But the game is so insanely optimized that it actually pulled through. But don't get your hopes up. This is only because I'm basically holding still. The moment you actually try to play the game, it reverts back to crashing, even with just ray tracing turned on. But by turning both path and ray tracing off, it runs way better than this computer should ever be able to render this game. But by doing this, I really don't think you're getting the full experience. Here's a comparison between a flagship and my thrift store computer. Especially right here, I think you could tell how much more vivid the flagship computer actually is. But you know what? It's running pretty decently. But that's enough about this. Let's finalize this PC. You know, it feels good to finally have this computer together and running properly, especially with how well it turned out. And sure, it took me a really long time to find all the parts and put it together, but I was never bored with this project. I constantly felt like I was learning something new that I would have never learned otherwise. I have to admit though, I've taken on some pretty big projects on this channel, but this one takes the cake. This was an enormous amount of work to put together. But I don't regret it at all. It was worth it, because in the end, I feel like I made a video right. And the thing about that is I showed a portion of this video to some friends before I released it to the public, and they practically begged me to ask you guys to like, share, and subscribe. Now, I hate doing that. It just feels scummy, but while I was editing this video, I realized they were right. This video is worth it. But regardless what you do, thanks for being here. That's all from me. My name is Turtle Dude. Peace out.